Welcome back, everybody. We'll get started, thank you, because we only have a limited time. Yep. It is. Oh, would you like to chat then, Mayor Perney, for a minute? David, Catherine and Robin, thank you. We'll let you have the floor, David.
Thank you, and great to be back having, part two of the conversation we started last week. So a reminder, last week we stepped you through the work that we'd been doing between, the previous briefing at the start of the year, the work that had been done with Stephen Burgess, some of the other feedback, community feedback that were built in, and it was with the view, that any questions, any comments that we needed to address, you could raise with the benefit of having read the draft strategy which we provided at the end of last week. So we went inundated. Thank you, Councillor Fox, for your question around the rail station, and have included that in today's presentation. So there were a couple of things that were raised last week, and also a couple of things where I reflected that I could provide a little bit more context. So a reminder today is about supporting you as elected members in understanding the proposed Levin access and parking strategy. It will guide future planning and decision making and its implementation, and that's the bit I want to spend a little bit of time just making sure we're clear on how that lands, and the different mechanisms to how the strategy actually gets implemented. And this was with the view that we'd like to get any final feedback to shape up a final draft strategy that could be presented to Council for adoption. Later today, the version that was provided to you will feature as part of the Levin Town Centre Steering Group conversation as well tonight, as we meet with that group. So ideally today we're looking to receive final feedback, identify or discuss any remaining concerns or matters, and when we get to the bits around recommendations, I'll step through those. We had some allergic reaction last week, some that we felt we needed to spend more time on. I'll go through those in a methodical way just to understand which ones we need to spend time talking about, and then we'll approach and work our way through those. But overall, hoping to leave with a level of comfort around the direction that the strategy heads, and a level of comfort presenting a paper to you in a couple of weeks' time. So again, we're in the see and the do space here. We are wanting you to understand and see where we've got to. For those who might have been a little bit time poor or found the very plain version of a strategy a difficult read, we have provided you with the two-page version of the strategy here, which certainly pulls out the key, on one side, the key strategic directions and the early actions, the side which is mainly white, is more the scene setting, the context for what is in the strategy. So that may be a helpful reference as you move through. So what we'll look to cover is, again, just how the strategy will guide future work, talk a bit about the implementation, and then set ourselves up for a conversation around final feedback. Don't know if anyone recognises the car in there. That was from circa 1960, Oxford Street. So parking was obviously a thing back then. Fairly wide carriageway there. So the context here is we are here talking about the access and parking strategy, and that has some connections to a couple of other key pieces. So yes, it's got a strong connection or relationship to the Levin Town Centre strategy. It does have a strong connection to the Land Transport Bylaw. So our current Land Transport Bylaw, which was updated in 2024, is what contains our current parking schedules and sets out where you can park for how long and so on. And as part of the strategy, so the back end of that document that you received at the end of last week, that is what has what we call the parking management guide and action plan. So the actions and things that we look to come out of the strategy as we look to implement it. And so just to be really crystal clear about this, when we're talking about the direction and the approach for car parking and access in the town centre, that is what the strategy, that's dealt with within the strategy. When we're looking at talking about the location, so where we provide car parks, the time limits that we might apply, and the different types of car parks, that is all addressed in the council bylaw. And so it's a very small snip there which you'll struggle to read, but that is an extract from the current Land Transport Bylaw, and so it'll give you an example of one of the schedules there which sets out the street, the location of where the parking relates to, and the time limit that applies, and any other sort of restrictions. And so that's a series of pages which go through every single park that council manages essentially or enforces on in the Levin area. When you're talking about parking, pricing and fees and charges, parking pricing, so the fees and charges that we apply, whether that's the money that goes into the meter or those things like the infringement notices and loans, that is set and dealt with through our parking fees, or through our overall fees and charges. And then when we're talking about things like parking technology, so new meter readers, all those sort of equipment that supports parking and its enforcement, those are the things that come up through the long-term plan. We're talking about budgets, we're talking about activities and how you want those to be carried out. So that's quite important. What I've just tried to set out there is, whilst we're talking about the strategy, there's a number of key parts within the council documents and framework, which is where the implementation or where the changes are made. So point probably trying to make there is, in a couple of weeks' time, we're asking you to adopt a strategy that is about setting the direction and the approach. That doesn't make changes on that day to the location of where people can park. It doesn't make changes to the time limits. It doesn't make changes to the parking prices. It doesn't make decisions on the technology that might be needed. Those all come through other processes which will involve council decisions. So if I take the Land Transport Bylaw as an example, that was last updated in November 2024. That was the previous version, had existed since 2017. It's prepared under the Land Transport Act. Many councils actually have a specific parking bylaw. We used to as well. We currently sort of not hide but include our parking schedules within the Land Transport Bylaw. And some of those councils have a parking bylaw as well as like a management guide or a manual which sets out some of those things in more detail. An option open to us if the strategy is adopted, and one of those steps for moving forward is to consider reviewing our bylaw, is that we could consider separating our parking component again into its own bylaw, and there might be some good reasons for doing that, which we could cover at that time. Within the current bylaw, I just want to identify a couple of things to again give some level of comfort. So in section 32 of it, it talks about how council may from time to time by resolution publicly notified, and then goes on to talk about those things such as the fixing the rental or charge to be paid for use of any parking area. Talks about the setting aside the portions of the road to be maintained for different uses. And then similarly in section 34, again by resolution publicly notified, using the special consultative procedure. So really being clear here that when council wants to change what it might do with car parks or the fees, it does require that special consultative process and essentially a council decision. So if we were to go down the route of reviewing and adjusting our bylaw, it then is about council providing that direction on what that review should cover. These are the very high level key steps. Officers would go away, do the research and evidence to prepare the changes to the bylaw, would draft a statement of proposal which would inform the consultation document. Council would then make a decision to adopt that consultation material to start the consultation process, which will lead us to submissions, the analysis of submissions received, a hearing, and then another council decision to adopt the bylaw. And at that point a new bylaw will be published. So several decision points which we'd be needing to come back to and work through with council to set the actual changes that might occur on the ground through the bylaw process. In a similar way, if council was to decide to change the pricing schedule or associated with parking that requires a council resolution, typically we do fees and charges. They were updated in parallel with the annual plan LTP, and it's usually done that way so we can adopt those in time to start for the new financial year. So again, a process there and a council decision to make those changes. So really trying to be clear that in asking you to adopt a strategy in a couple of weeks' time, you aren't making decisions on what the price is going to be. You aren't making decisions on that park going from P60 to P120 or a different. You aren't making decisions on that area there being long-term and that area being short stay. Those all come through these other mechanisms that I've just outlined. Last week there was a question asked around, well, how does the local businesses and the Horowhenua company feel about the draft strategy? We were able to provide that same version that you got last weekend to the Horowhenua company for them to provide their feedback. That same version is the one that will be presented to later today to the Levin Town Centre Community Steering Group. But the feedback from the Horowhenua company said they felt it aligns well with the broader direction emerging from the draft Levin Town Centre transformation strategy. So just a reminder, the Horowhenua company have been working on that, what we call the retail transformation strategy. So that's a parallel piece of work that you'll see soon. So they've seen, identified there's good alignment there. They feel the overall direction is consistent with the shift discussed in that retail transformation work, moving away from a centre focused on passing traffic to one that's focused more on experience, dwell time, hospitality activation, and a deliberate visitation post O2L. They also identified that they felt the strategy, the recognition that Levin broadly has sufficient parking supply overall, but that utilisation turnover issues are unevenly distributed across the centre, feels well grounded and practical, and that they felt the strategy provides a strong foundation, aligns well with the broader direction of the town centre transformation work, and they felt it was considerably more integrated with economic development, placemaking, town centre experience outcomes and other parking strategies they had seen. So helpful feedback, and as I say, it will be interesting to get the community steering group feedback as well. Question came up around, thank you Councillor Fox for raising this, around the railway station location and how the strategy continues to refer to the aspiration of doing that. And I'll make some comments and then I'll get Kat to briefly speak to this. The short version of a long answer is that it continues to be an aspiration. Whilst it wasn't that long ago, I guess we had a more short-term focus for it, trying to think about could this be moved before the new passenger rail service comes. It's become clear, and through some direction, I guess, given that we needed to be clear on saving our political capital for the important issue at the moment, which is around revocation and O2L. It also became clear that to probably do this and do this justice in the timeframes that were needed to happen before the new railway service is provided would have probably compromised that outcome. And so it's shifted from a short-term focus to a longer-term focus. So I guess the town centre at the moment is working on the basis that the current train station will be the train station in the short term, but we are still looking at the benefits and the opportunities of having a train station located closer to the town centre in an area north from here. And within that, that is, I guess, identified there's a range of challenges with moving a train station. There is the timing part I've just spoken to. Yes, there's a cost component to it. It's certainly not something council would be able to do on its own. There is the land, obviously involves land that isn't just council land, and there's multiple stakeholders, and in some ways that might present a more helpful opportunity a bit further down the track as well if we continue to see how local government plays out. At the moment we're dealing with a range of stakeholders. KiwiRail are one of those, but we're dealing with 2 regional councils, and NZTA play a part in this as well. In the future, obviously, there might be unitary authorities, or we might not be dealing with 2 regional council authorities and things. And so we're considering a piece of infrastructure that supports basic connection between Wellington and Palmerston North, but we're looking for a particular piece of infrastructure to support our community that sits on that network. And so conversations and meetings have continued to happen, and I'll let Kat just speak at a high level to some of the things that mean why this is more a longer-term focus than a short-term focus at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So as you can probably appreciate, a full transport in terms of a fiscally restrained environment, but also the changes that are going on is probably not necessarily a key focus, but also some of those stakeholders, the sheer cost to re-signal and the potential to re-signal any railway is very expensive, and so therefore as officers the direction that we've taken is focusing on the short term. the Levin railway station. So over the last few weeks or couple of months, we've been really focusing on the investment that Linram has already committed to Levin train station upgrade. So some of those things and the meetings that we're having are on wider beautification of the area. We're looking at providing feedback on the design of parking and access, but also they're currently working with iwi partners to discuss what the shelters might look like and things like that. So we've tried to, whilst we are very aspirational around the railway station relocation, and those conversations are still in the background, the short-term focus for us has been where we can influence some change and provide feedback on what will be the existing train station and how do we get people to wayfind into Levin town centre, but also make that experience positive for those that are using it. And probably to David's point is that we obviously have a revocation focus, and using political capital to be able to influence some big changes for council, we've obviously had to navigate and make some decisions around where that political capital is going to be used, and our focus definitely needs to be on revocation, which will impact us in the near future, and so making sure that we are well placed to that, but also probably speaking to some really exciting opportunities that are already happening in the town centre. It might be that transport hub might actually attract the attention of some third-party developers, and that would be part of the Levin Town Centre transformation conversation. So whilst it's not necessarily parking focused, it's a bit of an update of where we're at with the Levin railway station.
Thank you. So car parking in the context of growing population has been something that has been raised and asked to cover. So estimates have our Levin town population at just over 20,000 people at June last year. Based on the projected number of additional households that we have in our forecasting assumptions, by 2044 I would anticipate Levin having a population of 30,000 people. So between last week and now, I haven't been fortunate enough to travel to all these places, so I will openly admit that I've looked to rely on what information is available on the internet to understand how many car parks are available and provided in the town centres of these locations. So Levin sits, I think, ranked as the 30th or 31st largest urban area in New Zealand in terms of its town size, and so I've gone for those that are in that vicinity, currently in that vicinity, of what we would potentially be at by 2044, so around that 30,000 mark. And certainly looking at the information that's available, that has given us an indication on how many of those, how many on-street and off-street car parks are provided in those town centres. Now, in some of those places, that includes, if I take Horowhenua as an example, that includes the 400 car parks that are provided underneath the Trafalgar shopping mall, for instance. Other places, it does include some of those privately owned car parking opportunities. And you'll see at the bottom there our current population and the current number of town centre car parks that we have, and just highlighting there, that number there doesn't include the 163 parks in Bar Street, Salisbury Street, and doesn't also include those other sort of private parking sites like Countdown or New World. Trying to understand, and we've obviously been discouraged from just looking at growth and thinking that as someone arrives in the town, we have to provide them with the car park as it grows, but looking at some of the formulas that exist out there in terms of how do you understand your parking needs. What we have come across is two formulas which I'll speak to. This one here is around formula which talks about required car parks being based on your population times your town centre visit rate times the peak factor times car mode share divided by average vehicle occupancy and average daily turnover. So basing on 30,000 people and the best information that I could get, that formula would tell us that at peak demand, our town centre for a 30,000 population would need somewhere between 600 and 700 public town centre car parks. If you then allow for staff parking, event overflow, long stay parking, accessibility parks, you're looking at potentially between 1,000 and 1,400 town centre car parks to cater for those additional things at a point in time. There's another formula which is based on having in provincial centres, that town centres have potentially 3 to 5% of their population. So and I've put the two different populations here just to show that 30,000 obviously is what we think we'll be at by 2044. So at the low end there, 900 parks, up to a high end, 1,500. But using 25,000, if you saw that was the midway point between where we are now and where we might be in 2044, just to give you a gradient, I guess, as to how quickly might we suddenly need car parks. And so for 25,000, 750 with then a high end estimate of 1,250. So a reminder, we were currently sitting at that 1,100 plus at the moment. So our access and parking strategy is the planning framework is based on 755 parks in the town centre, so you would have read that in the strategy at the moment, aiming to try target an average occupancy of 85%, so essentially 642 full car parks. And so applying that framework implies that actually we could currently, based on our current population, could provide 400 less car parks than we currently do as a council. Obviously they do sit there and give us that capacity going forward. So just moving to what's in the strategy, and so I'll step through a few slides here, and then I'm going to be intentional about going through the recommendations and just seeing which one of those we need to have further discussions on. So within the strategy, we're proposing to allocate parking based on according to function and demand, looking to make evidence-based and community-informed decisions, tailor parking controls to local context and demand. We're looking at opportunities, that flexibility that got raised last week around having smarter tools to help manage that demand and behaviour change. Looking to enforce fairly, transparently, strategically, and support the community through change. And there's 6 sort of guiding principles here. So one is around prioritising short-term parking, directing long-term parking, particularly employee parking, to more towards the peripheral areas. To reallocate underutilised space, so look for some of those opportunities where some of our parks might provide other opportunities that can contribute to the town centre. Implement graduated controls, so that's that sort of flexibility, having the technology to support that, but also something you spoke last week around some of our technology being able to have people maybe to be able to top up for stay there, or how can we maybe have a flexibility that they're a price at one time of day but can have the flexibility to change to a different price at a different time of the day, maybe in peak. Managing both on and off street parking, so it definitely needs to work together. If you make one too attractive or too easy, that's going to undermine the effectiveness of the other. It definitely has to work as a relationship. And then importance of those sort of additional needs in the town centre, so designated loading and servicing zones. And I've included this here because I think I picked up last week almost this sense that as we talk through this, maybe a fear that by adopting a strategy we're going to try go from whatever step we're on now, step 1, straight to the end goal. That's sort of straight to where we'll be post O2L. The reality is we're going to have to go through a bit of an iteration, so that one with the staggered staircase is what we're going to need to go through. There's things like Oxford Street that we aren't actually going to be able to do much physical change in the next 5 years until O2L is open. If we're successful with revocation, then there could be some significant changes. You might not see a mountain in the middle of Oxford Street that might be able to be a more level Oxford Street. So there'll be some disruption there, and it's at that point in time it would make sense to then configure or reconfigure your potential parking arrangements in the town centre at that point of disruption, rather than to go do that tomorrow. And so what I see is that this strategy provides us that scope and flexibility to be making changes over a period of time as we move towards maybe a different outcome or different way of managing parking to what we currently do. But it does also allow us to respond to how the town's needs and demands change as well.
Can I ask David then, because you had that slide earlier on about talking about how strategy sits here, and then there's other things underneath it, including the bylaws. And so it's probably the one for me that's kind of the most on my mind is about taking parks away or reallocating public space, because that didn't seem to fit neatly under any of those subheadings. And so, like, if we accept that the strategy should obviously set the high level, how would you allay concerns or just some focus or some attention on how does this table not micromanage every detail, but like how do we still get to exercise some influence over and control over that reallocation of public space, taking stuff away that people are used to using and experiencing?
Thank you for asking that question, because it gives me an opportunity to probably elaborate on what I could have maybe added in a bit earlier. And it's through those bylaw processes. So as you give some direction that, for argument's sake, you adopt a strategy, and then we get direction from council, you can't consider these things in isolation. So no point me turning up saying, look, we think this is the right thing to do in Oxford Street or Bar Street or Queen Street. You need to see how that works in the context. And so it would be at that point where I think we are sitting down and we look at the town centre and we're starting to map out, well, okay, we provide this parking opportunity here, how's that supported by this, and this? And it might not necessarily be, hopefully, for those who've read the strategy, you'll get that sense that it's not all about taking away, it's about better management. And yes, we might get to a point in time where we decide, for Oxford Street, for example, that our ideal town centre environment for Oxford Street does look a little bit different, and maybe there is a different arrangement of parks there, but that all needs to fit within that wider context as well. And we need to, you can imagine a shop owner on the main street, we say we're going to take away car parks, we're going to change them to this, they're going to want to understand, well, where are my customers going to park? And so we need to be able to explain that context. And so it's through that bylaw process I would see us coming to you, and maybe we're in the room next door with a big map pulled out, and we're sort of showing how that works in a very sort of methodical and planned way. You give us that direction to then work on that and develop up what would be the consultation document and statement of proposal that we then go out to the community on, and then you'll have the benefit of submissions and feedback. We'll have the benefit from hearing for those who think they're most affected, and then council will again make the decision, okay, is that a change we're prepared to make in our bylaw and therefore implement, or is actually we do need to make some tweaks and changes based on the feedback. So actually see you've got a number of future opportunities, and the strategy is really providing that overall direction, but there's a fair bit of flexibility. And like I say, I don't anticipate that first conversation we're going to have where we map things out is what it will look like post 2030, because we need to go on that staggered staircase.
Sorry. Thank you so much for answering those questions in terms of the Horowhenua Company and projected growth. Really appreciate that. So I think I'm just following on from Sam's one, just so that I'm clear and I understand a little bit better. So we've got 750 parking spaces at the moment. We're not going to necessarily increase total parking, but we're going to stay broadly similar. But there is that flexibility in terms of projected demand growth and residential intensification for us to relook at that if we've got it wrong or if things aren't working well, because that's been my major concern, is that it's quite difficult for me when we don't have the numbers. I've got 750, but then I don't, and I'm quite a methodical person, when we don't have numbers to say, well, actually it's going to increase with that to be able to work with this particular situation. So it's just that reassurance for me that we do have that flexibility.
Yeah, and I think, so last week we alluded to the fact that we could play the numbers pretty easily by painting some white lines down Durham Street and Bath Street, and I can increase that number by about 100 car parks and could take away 2, and that will still not necessarily talk to the story that Councillor Jennings is talking to, which is some of those highly visible parks that might cause some contention, and so therefore the bylaw process is where we would look to do that. But the opportunity to be able to manage the car parks and push out some of those high occupancy areas where there's long-term car parking, not necessarily for shoppers, they're there as all-day workers, is being able to offer them some alternative spaces, and therefore it actually might alleviate some of those concerns, because we might have people willing to walk 50 metres to get to Oxford Street from the mall car park, but not necessarily 500 metres, and so it's telling the story, and we would fall back on the special consultative procedure, but also some really good positive comms from our comms team to be able to inform some of those stories as well.
Sorry, just one more thing as well. Just I know that's being recorded. Just to allude to reassure our community, is I've had a bombardment of saying yes, we are covering this in terms of disability car parking from our older population. So just to reassure that is being taken into account, that we're looking at it, and it's not something that's off the radar.
Absolutely, and hopefully some of the wording that you saw in here, one of the key objectives is around improving safety and accessibility, but it is for that range. It's not just the elderly, it's for those who mobility is impaired, it's the mums with young babies. It's really trying to make sure we've got parks in the right spaces for the people who need them. Probably just to touch on a couple of things, to be clear, the framework for the strategy is focused on that 755, I think, car parks. That's not to say because we've got over 1,100 at the moment that we're suddenly taking away 400 or doing something different. It's just the active parking management relates to that 750 in terms of where we'd be looking to either apply restrictions or apply parking charges and things, and how that works as a collective set of car parks to reflect our needs at the moment. There is still, as I say, in excess of 400 other car parks in and around the town centre that will still be available as a result of this. And I think the other point, probably in the reason for referencing 2017 being the version of our previous bylaw, I would not anticipate that it's a 7-year wait between whatever version of our next bylaw is and the one after that. Our town's going through a different evolution than perhaps what it experienced previously, and so it would be appropriate to have in our minds that there's a bylaw that gets updated, and then in a few years' time it does. And look, there will be an element of, I think, as you consider some of those changes as part of a potential bylaw process, that you won't know the answer and you won't have all the information, but you will need to make a decision, and you'll try something, and it might work in its entirety, it might work in part, it might not work, and then we learn from that and we go again. As I say, you might get it right the first time. Reality is, I suspect we'll get it right in some places, and we'll see what works and what doesn't, and it might be actually we made it a bit too long there or a bit too short there, and we need to come back. None of those things are major. I don't see those things as having major costs associated or risks associated with them, because I think in setting that, we can sort of have a period of time where we review and consider, okay, what do we understand by this? But the town centre is also going to be evolving over a period of time as well, and so even we might get the settings exactly right at a point in time, the town's going to evolve, and then we need to, it'll be this sort of two-step process.
Thanks, and thanks for all the work you've done getting the strategy to this point. That's an important thing for me, is that tension between the strategy and the bylaw, and it's sometimes quite a long time between bylaw reviews. Is there capacity within the bylaw to have kind of built-in, like you're talking about those, we realise we could have done better here, but do we have to wait for a bylaw review for it to be done? Can we build in some capacity to, fix stuff so that we don't upset the public who navigate these streets every day, or the user groups?
It'd be something I'd want to explore more, but what became interesting looking at our bylaw recently, when we found some signs in the incorrect place, was that it highlighted that in some places we had a bylaw that referenced different parking limits, which suggests that you can have a bylaw that does refer to and speak to different parking limits, and you can then pick and choose what you actually put the signs up to say, and what you then monitor and enforce. So it's something I'd like to test further. But if I followed that logic, that would allow us to perhaps build in some flexibility, and then it sort of becomes and probably the wording would want to reflect something in the bylaw to talk about how council will follow a process there. So residents don't fear that like there one day and the overnight council's going to change the sides. It's not that. We want to obviously reassure, but having flexibility that allows. And yeah.
So David, just building on that, I'm going to take you all the way back because I did write down when you were talking about separating the parking bylaw from land transport. Is that just a really good example of something that we actually do have to then a reason to bring forward and look at that separation? Because my question was, when you originally raised it, was, is there something not working that we do need to separate it out, or is it just that other councils do things differently?
There's both. So yeah, councils have arranged ways of doing it. As I say, previously we did it, then we jammed the two together, and that's worked for now. I think there will be some changes that we'll want to make to the land transport part of the bylaw as we go forward anyway. I think we'll probably be looking at maybe bringing around heavy vehicles going through town centre. There'll be some stuff there that's reflecting on where we're going that you might want to bring through there. But I could see some benefits, but again, we'd like to probably package up the pros and cons more fully for you to consider. But I could see benefits in separating out the parking into its own bylaw, because then it sort of means that if you when and if you do want to do your reviews, it can be quite focused and targeted to that. You're not necessarily having to sort of consult on all aspects that are covered by the Land Transport Act and what's currently in the Land Transport bylaw. But if you could perhaps just know that's something which we can come back to in future, but it's not a decision we have to make today, but certainly signalling something I think there could be good merit, given I think the iterative and evolutionary sort of process we may want to go through with parking and our town centre changes.
David, I know you want to get into the recommendations, but before you do, can I cover off two things? Because I think, like last week, I was quite negative about some stuff, and obviously I had the opportunity to kind of reflect on the conversation, but also really read the policy, the strategy in detail, and reflect on things. And so I was probably a bit premature in some of my, a little unfair on some commentary. And I've kind of listened to your advice to kind of lift up and understand where that second tier of direction sits. But before we get into the recommendations, I was really keen just to tackle that topic of the behaviour change piece, because that's something that philosophically I always get really nervous about council trying to get into a space of really trying to drive or direct behaviour change, because I just don't think it's our role. But probably the takeaway from reading the strategy is that we're actually, I think it's a bit more lighter touch than I might have implied last week, where it's about inducing certain outcomes and inducing certain behaviours rather than telling people and being too directive. But did you want to just comment on kind of, have I understood that correctly, that it's kind of intended to be quite light touch in terms of inducing some particular outcomes? Is that, yeah?
Thank you, and thanks for acknowledging your comments last week. It is, you have picked up right. Obviously, we had some a focused week with Stephen Burgess here, and certainly some of the recommendations and suggestions made there could be viewed as sort of quite radical, I guess, in terms of how far it goes towards a behaviour change. What I think you've picked up on has been an intentional balancing of that. There's certainly some good intent. There are some things that we know about parking. We have got some people who currently will find clever ways of basically parking all day in a park, which should really be for the convenience of a shopper or a visitor, as opposed to a worker who's there all day and conveniently uses their smoko break and their lunch break to move the car another spot, and then continues to sort of stay very close to where they work. And so there's things like that you would love to see that sort of behaviour change, and that can come through opportunity, signage, education, and so on. But I think this picture that remains on the screen is still a really relevant one. We hope that over time there will be some sort of change in behaviour. What I'm really mindful of is if we were to take and I'll call it the Stephen Burgess sort of recommendation, because that was where we invited him to test and challenge our thinking. If we were to go straight there now, great to encourage people to spend longer in your town centre, but have you got a town centre that actually warrants people spending longer there? And not yet is my answer. So we need to be realistic that we are on a journey, and as time progresses and we are able to develop and enhance and see more things in our town centre, then naturally that's probably going to support a behaviour change that actually people are prepared to park a little bit further away and walk knowing they're going to spend longer because they're going to do multiple things in the town. Whereas at the moment, there are some people who the main reason for coming to the town is to go to the ATM or to get their prescription or to pick up this thing, and there isn't that incentive for them to stay longer. And so you're right to pick up, there has been sort of quite a considered and measured approach, which I think the strategy invites and enables, but isn't certainly going that strong-handed approach that set as an option, but we don't think it's the right time to be going there, and we'd much rather go on the staggered staircase, which recognises that as improvements happen in the town centre, we can start to tweak further or encourage further changes. Right, so recommendations. What I'd like is I'll go through each one, and if this is something which is you have an allergic reaction to or you feel we really need to discuss, could you signal? And in the remaining time, we'll make sure we prioritise those who probably is the most interest. But I'm hoping there's some that, based on what we heard today, is actually a level of comfort around. So, first one is around considering, and again, know that the bylaw process and us sitting down with you with the map and things will be the process we do that. But one recommendation is ahead of vote or no, we consider making some changes to parking time limits that actually encourage people to stay longer. Is that one that warrants further discussion or debate? Noting we're in a workshop.
The only thing I added last week on this particular one, as I use as an example, was comfortable with that, with the counterbalance, and I know it's about the making sure that it's still acknowledging that there's going to be a need for shorter stays. So, without getting into the specific time limits, it's just acknowledging that there's some nuance to that.
I'm really comfortable with that because, as you were speaking about before, it's about testing things and seeing how they work, and this is a really good way for us to put that in place and then have it, think about it, test it, and see, yep, this is working, we can actually use this as we're moving forward. So yeah, I'm really happy with that.
David, just for clarification, this is not just the metered parking spaces, is it? It's everywhere. So people will still be able to park for 10 minutes or, if they want to, obviously. Okay.
Next one, about extending the area of paid parking. So this is an explore one. Because again, you won't make the change here, but it'll be one we'll come back and explore. But it's looking at extending it out to Exeter Street, so going a bit further, recognising we have got businesses down there and the way those streets are currently used. Great. Explore current parking fee settings. So again, it's a process we go through there, but open to not keeping those exactly the same. Good. Exploring future upgraded parking equipment that can enable variable and dynamic pricing. So again, not committing to this, that will have to come through an LTP, but it's certainly exploring the options and what might be needed to support having that flexibility and dynamic pricing.
Sorry, David, just going back to the parking fee settings, in terms of infringements, I mean, you go to different towns and they have different infringement fees for parking. Well, I thought that was almost set centrally. Yeah, but I don't understand how that's set. Do we have an opportunity to revisit that ourselves at some stage? Is it?
Happy to clarify that. I feel some are set and some you might be able to influence, but certainly the one I guess we're focused most on is the actual cost to use a car park versus the infringement. That can be part of the conversation, but we're probably trying to go with the less the stick approach and more just how do we make sure people are understanding a trade-off. I'm going to pay more to park here for this amount of time versus the punishment side of it. And then within here, next recommendation was around just exploring more locations for electric vehicle charging stations. So this isn't saying council's going to go out and suddenly pay for those or provide them, but as opportunities come up, we want to have a clear understanding where does it make sense for those to go and be able to direct those people to those opportunities.
So yeah, I wanted to explore this one because I'm not exactly clear on what it looks like as a practical implementation, because for me, like, I'm comfortable with council if someone comes to us and says, hey, I'm a EV charging station company and I'd like to put some infrastructure in your town, where's the best locations, then we're responding to that. But this felt like we were playing a kind of a lead, going to the market, trying to influence the market, and that I'm not comfortable in that space. I'm comfortable in a let's respond and facilitate, but I don't want council to lead in the space.
So then I'll follow on from that. The reason I raised it is exactly as Councillor Jennings says, is I want the ability for council officers somewhere in the strategy to not have to come back to council if an opportunity presents itself. So that we don't want a strategy that's binding and doesn't have the ability for officers to explore an opportunity if it comes up. Because the reality is there's going to be a need for more EV charging stations. I don't believe it's the role of council to provide them, but I do want to make sure there's flexibility in our strategy, so if opportunities present themselves, that we don't waste councillors' time having to bring a report back to council just to explore it.
Yeah, so it's very much around the planner and me just wanting to be slightly ahead. So if an opportunity does come up, we can say, well, actually, that corner of the mall car park or that corner actually makes more sense for these reasons, or we know we can get services or whatever it is there, as opposed to something coming in, maybe missing an opportunity because we haven't sort of been organised and done that planning work, or we get a poorer outcome because we say yes to the first sort of suggestion as opposed to understanding how it sits in the context. So moving on, second set here. So again, based on today, you've obviously picked up the importance of our bylaw and the role that plays. So this recommendation is saying that we assess the currency policy and bylaw settings and consider where a review may be necessary to support that town centre transformation. So just comfort with that. Continue investigating the disposal of off-street parking sites. So obviously, as we know, one of those is when this was being developed is currently going through a process, and you'll be receiving a report on that in due course. And that's probably the extent of that one at the moment. The next one is developing a design for Oxford Street post O2L bypass. So that's recognising, particularly between the lights, revocation provides an opportunity. That's both understanding what we need and what our town centre to look like, knowing that that will have an impact, or parts of that, elements of that will contribute to the accessibility and parking. But for us to obviously go into a revocation deal, it's quite important. I think we understand what it is that we need in that space.
So David, on this one, this is one of the ones I had an allergic reaction to last week, because I kind of read people focused as stealth language for pedestrianise, so I reflected on that, and I think that the intent seems to be about people user focused, so that includes people who need car parks. So kind of comfortable with that, but I'm hoping it isn't like, it's not like we're not going to use it as a permission to slip to say the focus is going to shift away from cars to just pedestrians, or giving pedestrians more of a primary user position.
Will 10,000 vehicles going through the main street on a daily basis be enough cars for you? Yeah, so we actually spent yesterday doing an internal planning session around some revocation stuff and looking at the traffic, having the traffic models up, and probably that 10 to 13,000 is probably realistically the number of vehicles that you'll still have going through there. So it's going to still be a street that needs to have cars in and can allow for that movement, but there are some things that we can do that can contribute to the pedestrian experience. And part of that, if you can imagine that camber of the Oxford Street at the moment, one of the things we think is going to be a key part of our revocation is how do we make that actually a different profile so it does support people being able to cross, does support being able to park easily and those sorts of things, which all contribute to that people-focused mainstream.
No, that's good, because that's exactly the point, is that the form and function of the road is primarily going to be a road still with a huge amount of traffic volume, and I didn't want us to have something in a strategy that then implies we're trying to create additional kind of friction or frustration points where it makes it less vehicle friendly, because it's going to become going to be such an essential arterial route. So that's fine. So that with that clarification, that's good.
And then the final recommendation here is around this recommendation to seek expressions of interest for utilising parking spaces, potentially those sort of like build out areas or additional sort of hospitality space. So it's recognising that in some cases some car parks might actually be able to contribute to the town centre. We talked about last week in some places there's been a piece of equipment that maybe takes up 1 or 2 car parks, and there's been an opportunity for shops to sort of say, I want to hire that for 2 months or something, and test an opportunity as outdoor dining, or as having some additional sort of outdoor floor space associated with the shop actually sort of contribute to the business and things. So part of it is testing that, or this here is about testing the appetite for that to see whether it's something worth exploring, and then there's probably a few different spots on Oxford Street where maybe it could make more sense. So
I actually am really supportive of that. I love that idea, because that really feeds into what you said before in terms of social interaction, retail and hospitality. And for me, that's really important when you're talking about the sustainability here, and in terms of our environment, and looking at walking and cycling, because cycling would definitely come within that particular understanding of utilising those spaces to be able to accommodate that. And also the public transport, that's huge for me. In thinking about that public transport, that's part of that strategy of saying, how do we make that accessible? So very, very supportive of that personally.
So this was again one of the ones that I've had a history with, but all I was having reflected on it, I think what I'd be looking for personally is a slight change in language. So it would be more about, rather than us chasing this, for me it's about being open to reallocating public car parking space for outdoor hospitality and other commercial opportunities. So we're taking a state where we're open to those conversations and initiatives, but we're not actually going out there and saying we think this should be an outdoor eating area here. Like, I just think it's the kind of approach and the tone to it. Like,
Sorry to be a pain, but I'm actually for chasing. it. I do think it's really an important part of beautifying our town centre, and just using other examples that we have in other towns of how do we make this more accessible and beautiful. So totally respect and understand your position, Sam, but from a personal point of view, I think it's a really important space.
perhaps a comment to just add a little context to this. As a council, we've got a fairly unique opportunity where, particularly in Oxford Street, come 2030, Oxford Street won't need to continue to be State Highway 1. And so we'll go through a process of, as per the previous bullet point, of looking at Oxford Street and how it might work and what might be needed there. I think there is an opportunity between now and 2030 to potentially use this to test and pilot and sort of get almost a bit of an on-the-ground, real-life sort of test examples to see, actually, does that work? Is that something which is going to be worth building into our town centre design for Oxford Street? Or we've tried it, but actually it wasn't quite what we thought, and therefore the town centre design should be different. So I'm hearing both sides, seeing an opportunity, and I think we can obviously manage how we walk that, and there might be some opportunities outside Oxford Street as well, but we know that we're going to be limited in terms of how much change we can bring to Oxford Street between now and 2030. But some things like this we have tested with NZTA and said, do you think there would be a willingness to enable, we know it's still your road, but if we would approach you about taking over a couple of car parks and trying this, would this be something that could be supported? And there's been a warm response to that. So it certainly hasn't been a no, you have to wait. And so it could be a way which we can, as I say, both show some signs of what we might be trying to make the town centre, but also to test it and have the opportunity to pilot something and see if it works.
Thank you, David. I am conscious of the fact that there's been quite a few members quite quiet through this. Does anybody else want to at least advise whether they've had an allergic reaction to this or they're happy with what's going forward? I'm very happy with what I'm seeing so far.
Just so I don't feel left out, and I'll jump in. Yeah. What is it? Yellow cards. Hey, look, I'm pretty relaxed. I think it's a lot of it makes sense. I suppose it's not wasting time on things that are too blue sky, if you like. But yeah, I'm pretty relaxed.
Just adding 2 cents worth so I don't get in trouble. Thank you for the amazing amount of work that you've put in here and breaking it down, not just for us, but for those that may be watching online who may be interested in how you put this together for us. But otherwise, yeah, no, really happy with it. Thank you for all the money.
Kia ora, David and team. I tautoko the recommendations from, I know that particularly for Shannon, the Shannon community coming into Levin, we have a small community, so a lot of whānau, a lot of people, Levin is our centre, our town centre, so the time frames for them to stay here rather than supermarket out, because that's what usually happens. So I love the idea to the social interaction. When my father was here, I would bring him to town, and he loved, before the statue outside the mall there, he used to love sitting there, and he'd catch up with all the elderly people, strangers. So that social interaction is very important, especially for our elderly, our kaumātua in this rohe of Horowhenua. So good job, well done. Kia ora.
My view is very much as much flexibility as possible, because businesses in general like to try things and fail fast and not be locked into things. And the problem with bureaucracy and councils and things is you have an idea and it takes forever to implement, and then you just move on because it's too hard. So I'd like to see as much flexibility as possible with the least amount of bureaucracy would be my favourite thing.
Hopefully I'm still around in 2030, David, but the last thing we need is for a parking strategy to become the Lambert Key of issue of what Wellington has turned out to be in terms of investing or thinking about investing massive amounts of money just to try and really create some amenity. We've got to find that right balance between the realistic accessibility of the town centre to trying to create this wonderful space and everything like that. So, and I know the work you've done. I think it's probably one of the bigger pieces of work I've seen in terms of the amount of effort and time that's gone into it. And I think you've covered every base. And I'm actually really thankful that it's sending the right message to the community that we're seriously, taking this seriously. We're not just trying to do it piecemeal or anything like that either. It's very much a whole holistic look at it.
Well, asking me anything missing, and so I am hearing that I might be the pain in the backside. So I will keep it short. This was very helpful. I think the thing that my reflection from reading the draft strategy was that it is. I'd really like a really strong anchoring principle of kind of right park, right place, right user, because for me it's it needs something right up front that is about what we're trying to do, and so also the sentiment around that we're actually going to have more, maintaining the same number of car parks over our entire network, but they just might be in a different place and for a different purpose. Like, because I think that that's our key thing, is that we have to assure our public that we are about just looking at our network in a different way. It's not about trying to take stuff away and reduce the number of car parks, because I'm certainly not in that space of actually saying I want to drop the number of car parks. We're just eventually going to be looking at where they sit, and so that kind of flows on. Those anchoring principles flow into that user experience, like the user need and experience. And under the key strategic directions on this piece of paper, it's kind of got a really useful comment here saying long stay parking will be directed towards lower demand fringe areas within a comfortable 300 to 500 metre walk from the town centre core. That should absolutely be one of the key targets. So we should have like 3 targets at the front, which says shouldn't take you longer than 5 minutes to find a car park for your particular use that will need the type of user you are. If you're in the long stay, you shouldn't have to walk. You shouldn't have anything other than a comfortable 300 to 500 metre walk. And if you're in the core, you should have a comfortable 2-minute walk or something like that. I'm not saying that those are the specific targets, but I think we should have like a small number of really grounding targets that then everything else hangs on. And I don't think anything that I've expressed there is inconsistent with what's already in the strategy, but we need those really strong statements right up front so that it then cascades down. So, yeah, that's my view. If anyone wants to disagree with that, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam, which now made us over time, and I was so keen to finish on time. But they were very valid comments. I just particularly wanted to acknowledge all the mahi and that, and to me the visual steps of reminding everybody, particularly those online, that this is, while it's a marathon, there are rest stops along the way, and that the changes are over a period of time with flexibility to respond to town's needs. So thank you very much for all your hard work, and I hope we've given you today what you need to go forward.
Thank you very much.
Right, we will be breaking for lunch, and if everybody will be back 1 minute before 1:30, that would be great. Thank you. Right, well, we'll get started then. Are we on? Right, well, we'll get started. So thank you. Welcome, Dan, back. I hope you had a lovely drive. It should be nice outside that we haven't seen today. And at the top table, we have Monique with you, Ashley, and is Caro joining? Okay. And so I'll let you take it away.
Fantastic, thank you. So we are back here again today to present to you a position and an approach to move forward with the Head Start position and discussion following on from last week. Purpose of today's presentation in the session today is to discuss that process for you and to support you along to make a balanced head and heart decision, which were the words used last week, in terms of the Head Start backstop approach. To connect the principles important to council and what you want to achieve within the long-term plan, this process and the long-term plan community outcomes. So we'll be going through those today. And also looking at the approach around the community conversation, which we heard last week was a really important part of this process around the Head Start. Oh, sorry. I'll move this to the side. So we're utilising, is that better? Could you hear what I said previously? Okay. Yeah. So just reiterating around proposing, taking you through the community conversation approach that we're looking to do and utilising everything we do through this process like we were with the Is this better? Hello? Testing? Perfect. Okay. Hopefully this works. I'll hold it up. But just, yeah, making sure that talk really loud. And through the Future Fit roadmap work that we were doing alongside the Head Start, that we're utilising the opportunity to progress and move forward with the long-term plan as well. So today we are in the do space. There is going to be some discussion today that we hope you're involved in. Also, you're providing some feedback around that community conversation as well. So what you already told us last week, we heard from you that there were some significant concerns around the tight time frame. So what we've done is we've put a program together around how we believe we can make that 9th of August date around the Head Start process, and then also how we weave that into the long-term plan. The document that you have on your table is there for you to take away today, and what we will be doing next week is really delving deeper into this and sharing that journey of how we're going to get from here until June 2027. That's something for you to keep. So in terms of the Head Start process, previously you would have seen this slide last week, and this was was really mapped around the Future Fit roadmap. We've already done quite a bit of work internally and with you already, and it's just reiterating that work hasn't gone on the wayside, is still really relevant. We're just now looking at it in a different lens. So previously we were looking at it in the lens of Future Fit roadmap, quite a revolutionary LTP. We're looking at it in the lens, and rates capping was a big lens. Now we're looking at it in the lens of making sure that we're prepared for the Head Start backstop process and amalgamation or reforms in whatever form that looks like. And so being prepared that the work that we do continuing to do is that is useful information no matter what the direction is or that final decision is in the end, that we're prepared for what that is. So being really smart about the work that we're doing.
So in terms of the Head Start work program, which is what you asked us to go away and come back to you with, we've put a proposed timeline together. It does look like it is just linear and we're going to easily go through in those step-by-step process. It's absolutely not going to be like that. It does look really nice, but it won't be like that. So while there are dates there, there will be discussions throughout this entire time. There will be times where we're coming back to you with information. There will be parts where we will be gathering information. Partners may come, they may drop off. So throughout that entire process, there will be interaction and engagement with the table. But what we're initially looking at is, so the 13th, which is today, we've got that direction on approach, which is what we're going through. And then we're going to start our community conversation, education and engagement piece next week. So that, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. Lisa's going to come and talk to you about that, but looking at our phased approach and making sure that we're educating the community, and then we're going out and testing the community with certain questions where we can utilise that information for this process, but also for early engagement as part of the long-term plan. Alongside that, determining the approach that council wants to take around scope and role, partners, direction, information that later in the presentation we'll go back over that you shared with us last week around what matters to you, what do you want to know about other councils. So we'll be doing a piece of work in relation to that and bringing that back to you. We'll then look to develop a content and draft proposal in whatever form that might look like as we go through this process, circulating that draft. And then on the 22nd of July is a council meeting. And so looking to have that endorsement at that council meeting to then put in that proposal on the 9th of August. Noting that, as I said, this day, it looks like a straight line. Things will change, there'll be iterations, and if we need to pivot or move, we can make adjustments to this process, and I'm sure we will need to as we go through the process. As officers, we have put it into 5 work streams. Those 5 work streams are very much from the information that you shared with us last week, and today we're specifically focusing on 1 to 4. That's the area that we're focusing on now, and then next week with this document, we will go more into number 5, which is the LTP approach. So community outcomes and what matters. So that is specifically for the Head Start process, but then we can also utilise that as part of the community outcomes for long-term plan. We'll be talking about that today. The community voice and early engagement, we'll be going over that today as well. And then kind of that process is that space that we're in now, process work stream, Head Start, Head and Heart work stream. Maybe just at this point, should we just pause? Because before we get into the actual work streams itself, we're going to start doing some heavy lifting around inputs into particularly 1 and 2. Just any kind of feedback on those 5 work streams at a high level. What's missing or what's reassured you, knowing that the detail we're going to get through. So, for example, community voice and early engagement, we're going to talk a little bit more about that soon. Dan?
And while you're thinking about that, as Ashley said, it's not going to be a nice linear process. It's going to be iterative. Information's going to come out of these different work streams at different times that are either going to shut off an option or perhaps put an option forward. Information might come out that helps you determine between an option or helps you crystallise something that's really important about, say, representation, that then has to be tested with your partners. So you can expect it to go round and round as we sort of shut off pathways in order to get to the end. And you don't, remember, Water had an opt-in, opt-out thing. You don't have to opt in, if that's the language you want to think, until 11:59 on the 9th of August. So you've got all that time, and we may use all of that. If you've got a council meeting on the 22nd of July and your paper needs to be done on the 15th of July, that's 28 days of our 90 odd days that are taken away.
So, it is going to be a bit like that. So we are going to have to ask for your indulgence on some of this.
Just following on, in terms of that community engagement, one of my concerns is there are so many variables and we are going to be turning left, right, backwards, forwards, that it would be really perhaps beneficial for us to inform the community that this is a changing process. So what we tell you now may not be what we're going to tell you in 3 weeks, and that's not because we don't know we're not capable of doing that. It's just that there are these variables, and so we need to be flexible ourselves, and I think that's a really important message to bring them along with us.
Really good point, and I don't want to steal Lisa's thunder because she'll speak to the community engagement slide soon, but one of the we know that education is going to be a necessary step before we kind of ask for feedback, but managing our expectation on what we're educating on, that kind of authenticity with the community being like, we don't really know, is important. The other feedback just feels about right.
Yeah. Information come back to you at some point in late July, and those work streams have all been delivered. And those work streams have all been delivered. It is everything you would have needed to have happened, to the extent we can do it in 8-10 weeks, going to be in there.
Just relaying the views of Councillor Grimstone, who called me this morning and asked me to report back to him on the session, but his commentary was he was still of the view, consistent with what he expressed last week, that the process kind of needs to be light touch. He didn't want to put too much effort in, but he did reinforce that it was important that we stay in the mix and keep options open and considering options. So just putting his views there now, just so that,
And maybe just to because to check in with the table, like we thought what we heard last week was in the frame of Future Fit HDC and in the frame of that being one of our top 3 priorities, you wanted to be a leader. That doesn't naturally get you to the position of saying we're submitting a Head Start process and it will look like this, but I think what we heard from the table was you want us to make sure that we are prepared for it and we're as best dressed as we can be. And so internally, yes, there is effort. I wouldn't describe it that we're putting like no effort and low priority to this. It's probably high priority and high effort. But where I think that light touch language is well expressed is about how we manage our expectations about the extensiveness of the analysis or inputs or outputs that come out of this. This is not the 12 months that we've had to develop a parking strategy or for example, noting that you've just commented on what an excellent piece of work that is. Or is it the 3 years that we had to negotiate a water services delivery plan? So expectations around quality and depth of information is probably where I've interpreted the light touch. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Okay.
I certainly think what you've done just in a week encapsulates where I think, at least my thinking was, and to try and do our best for our community by being as best prepared as we can.
Okay, so out of last week's workshop, when I pressed you about what was important, this is what I took down. When you look at that, do you see gaps? Do you see things that actually, I'm not sure it's as important as the other ones up there? Because full disclosure here, we will use these quite quickly. So if we're not right, now's the time to adjust. It's not that you never get to adjust them again, but
no gaps, and in fact, we wouldn't want to add any more to that, to be honest. That's plenty enough.
Kia ora. Is iwi or mana whenua under local identity? Just want to check.
based on your experience, which this probably has never happened, is 6 a reasonable number to be working with, or would you prefer to see less? In other words, should we be chopping it down? I agree with Councillor Allen, we shouldn't be increasing it, but is 6 a workable number of 6 points?
Funnily enough, I've translated them to a slightly smaller group on the next slide. You certainly wouldn't want more. Like 5's are probably about right, but 6 you can work with. And what we're trying to turn them into is something that might differentiate options. Because the worst thing is to set up a process that comes out and says, well, actually, they all meet that test or they all do it. You want to try and find something that might differentiate.
So, Dan, we're talking about the Head Start process, aren't we? So, does relationships come into that? You know, the importance of good relationships, whether it be with our own community or whether it be with other communities that we're going to have a dance with. Where does that fit in?
Your chief executive's wondering whether that's more of an enabler in the process, and also I wonder whether that's more about this organisation rather than these are kind of community. What's important to council, HDC, and its community, probably.
Yeah, and because yes, while we're talking about the Head Start process right now, just to remind you what Ash has articulated is through this process, we're looking for double duty outcomes. So we're looking for, let's get through the conversations that will help inform Head Start, but at the same time, ensure those conversations weave into our long-term plan so that we've not lost time on our long-term plan. So this isn't just about what's important to you through a Head Start or a backstop process. Backstop? Yeah. It's what's important.
So I just had 2 points on the service resilience and efficiency. I think it needs to be service scope / resilience and efficiency, because in our mix there'll be councils that do more and less, and so that's what's important to me. And then under the affordability heading, I wonder if that needs to be affordability / something about subsidisation, because we're talking about affordability and it naturally involves conversations about the level of subsidisation one way or the other, but actually that is going to be a key decision making criteria for us and partner councils, right?
Sorry, I'm terrible at this. Yeah, it is. And actually, when I translate those things that are important to some principles that we've got there, affordability is actually a really challenging one, because when do we judge it? Do we judge it now? Do we judge it in 10 years? Affordability is driven not just by the cost of council, it's also driven by the community and the relative incomes of the community, which change over time. Or are we looking for kind of a financial sustainability of the organisation that we might be joined with? Or is it a mix around a sort of a financial sustainability, the indebtedness, a rate, some sort of metric that tells you that kind of, I don't know, what you're getting into bed with. And so I think there's some, I think it needs to be in there, but I'm not quite sure how to measure it at this point. And so that's why there's a question mark there.
Could you frame it as something just like more like just financial merits or something like that? Because it's like it's kind of the whole picture of all of the different metrics and tools, you know, things that you measures that you can assess. Like it's about what does the financial picture look like?
Yep, it could be a way through. And like the others, we sort of note some particular things about, you know, if rates, you know, cost of services, or we're trying to work out a metric that sort of involves debt per capita alongside affordability alongside a rates measure. So you kind of get a mixer of how much debt they hold versus how much people pay for services, which might include some of that sort of liability in there.
I just want to add that I think the capability part of that is really important in terms of our communities. The median, wage or income per year is 38,000, and we have quite a high mana whenua, so we've got a different makeup that we might have, say, in another area. So I think that capability of what is realistic economically and socially for our community would come into play from my perspective in terms of, well, that group might be on a completely different level of wavelength and expect the same from us, and we can't deliver.
Any other questions or comments or inputs around these? Retention of local voice and identity. I think that was a pretty familiar theme here. And I might push you on this. You have community boards? One community board. If one of your partners said, no, we're not having community boards, would it be a deal breaker for you? Like how much of a red line is that? What do we actually mean by local voice?
Paul, I got there before you, sorry. Okay. As a former community board member with no fiscal responsibilities, I think it's looking at the research and then doing the consultation as to what will work. It's very easy when you have not experienced community boards to say no, but there are some very good structures around the countryside which I think need to be investigated and reported on. That doesn't mean to say that's the way we'd want to go in the end either, because we heard this morning there's some other options on other ways of structuring organisations so that we don't lose that local voice and identity. So I'd say community boards are one option.
I was just going to touch on that, and that I raised it last week, but I think there is different vehicles to make that work, and we look at, I suppose, a ward system within our current HDC, and it probably does sort of get a voice from different participants, but I don't think it would be a deal breaker, but I think there is different mechanisms, as Noel has already commented on, to have that voice heard at the table. So you'd have to be open to.
Yeah, look, and for me, it's not as simple as bottom line. You can't have community boards. It's how do we make these values work, and the way we've made it work in recent times, and it was a very smart move, was to say you want it, you pay for it. And so it's about finding a way to retain local voice where we see it matters within this bigger organisation.
Can I play devil's advocate for a minute? And why are we overthinking this? I mean, the reality is we've been directed to find a partner. So we aren't the only ones choosing. We've got other people choosing whether they want to go with us. So is it not, all these things that we're thinking of that are important to us, in the end might be a little sort of impact in terms of how we go or where we go, because of whoever chooses us, we're just going to have to take it, aren't we? I just wonder why I don't want to spend a whole lot of time thinking about these are all our values and these are all the things we want if we've got nobody to actually talk with us about it. That's why I just sort of throw the theory out there. Are we spending too much time thinking about this sort of stuff, or we just find someone who we want to talk to and then talk about these sorts of things and what's important to us?
I think it's a fair question to ask. I think you're doing both at the same time, and really you're not spending much more time on this than today now. And the idea is that this might help you differentiate between choices, should you have them, and also help you if there is only one council who wants to be your partner, then in July or August you've got a decision whether you do want to be put into a head start or actually say, well, that option is not what we want for our community, so we're not going to agree it, and we will take what comes. No, well, yeah, no, I'll leave it.
Because on Bernie's point is, I kind of get what you're saying, but I do think we have to also be really clear on like what we're open to and what we want to negotiate around. Because like, take as an extreme example, say if there was a council partner that funded golf courses, operated golf courses, and funded golf courses. I don't want our ratepayers, subsidising that, paying for that. So like, there's got to be some things in here, some themes where we say, nah, we're just not. That's not for us. Like, well, that's got to be on the table to be able to have the conversation. And so, like, even improved services, like, I want to test that, because that's saying that we need to have better services than we currently have. But our long-term plan conversation was going to be about, actually, is there some stuff that we do less of that look different? And so, yeah, I have like some concern about that word, improves services, because it might be improves the affordability or the efficiency or the optimization, but it might not actually be that we come out of this with better, more services. Look at impacts on services. Yep.
Because what I'm worried about is if we stick bottom lines, we're not going to end up with anyone that wants to do it, and we'll discount everybody that could possibly be, and then we end up in a backstop process where we're told, no, you will go that way, and that's where I just, tossing up that sort of, we shouldn't be limiting ourselves by making too many bottom lines and things like that. We should be open to having those discussions later on, and it may not be before August the 9th, it may well be later, after, when we start getting into the details of what a partnership might look like.
I mean, I agree. I don't think we should be limiting ourselves either. But I actually think if we look at it from a strategic point of view, and also what we've all agreed on, which is education, it's exactly what we're doing right now, recording this in the public, is these discussions, I feel, are absolutely strategic for our community to understand where we're coming from, what we're thinking, because this is a way in which we keep them informed. And so in discussing these, I don't think it should lock us in, but it certainly helps with the long-term plan, and it certainly helps ensure that from a governance point of view, we as governors are bringing forth to the table the concerns the communities might have in all of our different aspects that create a more dynamic and I suppose concentrated outcome. So I see this as part of the education as much as anything else.
Just one point that I'd like to raise, and it's probably not the right place to raise it, but also compatibility on how we collect rates. Like if we went with another council that collected their rates based on capital value, not of land value, we're the opposite to that. That's going to change the whole makeup of and really hammer our rural communities. And then the narrative is that this is going to, the government's got this view that this is going to save ratepayers money. Suddenly you have a group of people that are going to get huge rates increases. It'll be tricky.
Yeah, so is there something in there around the financial sustainability and affordability, the fairness piece?
Maybe the financial one is financial alignment or something that then looks at compatibility of rates, debt, affordability in there under that again, you're not necessarily going to be able to say it's better, but again, that's easier to do and it's quicker. We're not going to be producing large financial models for this in the time that's available. It is data packaged up to a bit like a brochure.
Should we also have something in there that says that we should consider how our community outcomes align? Each council will have a series of community outcomes, and shouldn't there be some consideration for how we might align with in terms of our outcomes, because those are the contract we essentially have with our community that's been canvassed through the long-term plan. So
yep, and so we've brought them through into the sort of information pack that you would have about potential partners here. These are the things that were brought up last week. It's absolutely the community outcomes, the alignment of key strategies, things like that, which again is relatively easy to do. It's all documents these days with the magic of AI. It can be pretty easily brought to bear and compared with some sense checking of it. And then the community profiles, which I think is what you're alluding to. What are the communities of interest? Where do they come from? What do they do? Where do they work? What facilities do they use? How aligned are we? So in the spirit of the same thing, and we're just moving. I know we're moving fast, but is there anything else that you'd want to know about a potential partner?
Just the other baggage. What else? I guess it's sort of full disclosure. I mean, I look at councils maybe to the north. What big projects have they got going on, and what implications they have? But I mean, it's all probably captured under those headings. We could have a Dropbox down under each heading that probably has a whole lot of things, I guess.
I guess for me, it's whether there is clear understanding so that we don't partner with someone and then they just go into this is really about us and our community, and thanks very much, you're the smaller person or whatever, and we'll just go ahead and do what we need to for us, and we'll consider, but this is the pathway that we're going on. So it's a real understanding. It's a combined effort, and that stays regardless of how councils will progress in the future, who comes in, who comes out. That's this expected understanding.
I wonder whether one way to look at this is if you're in a backstop process, based on what we've currently heard from the government, it's that idea that your ability to lead or have self-determination through that process will be taken away from you. And so if you are weighing up the option of participating in a Head Start process, what is so important to you that would warrant your consideration in the Head Start process, knowing that if you're in a backstop process, none of this stuff would get taken into account because it will get decided for you?
I got there before you. I'm going to just say your favourite terminology is no surprises. I think there has to be that due diligence of and being open and honest in a partner, that whatever they tell us is in confidence, but we've got to go in knowing warts and all.
Sorry, can I clarify? Are you talking about central government as well, or just about partners? Because if this process was about central government, for me, what would be really important is conveying the complexities and the concerns and the transitions and all sorts of areas that us as councils have to make. So even if they did decide at the end to say, well, this is what you're doing, at least signalling the concerns to them from the outset, for me, would be an important part of this process.
I think it's a good point about that interface into Wellington, and Caro shortly we're going to talk a little bit about some messaging we think would be helpful to government right now. But yeah, the complexity piece shouldn't be understated.
Don't we ultimately, sorry, I'm just thinking on the fly here, don't we ultimately think the first engagements, we basically want to know what the potential partner's level of appetite or aspiration for operational integration versus governance integration, because they're kind of two different things, right? And so when we talk about amalgamation, you can use that word to describe lots of different end outcomes. And so isn't that one of the first things to actually get a sense of what are we actually talking about? When we're talking about amalgamation, are we talking about one entity, one level of service, one consistent rating model, or are we actually talking about amalgamation of operational back office functions, and that there's still differences at a local level? We actually have to, the first step should surely have to be to understand the potential partner's understanding of how we're going to define amalgamation. Is that fair? I don't know. Maybe it's.
I think it's an early step. I don't know if I would agree that it's a first step, because form should follow function, and if council were to say, ahead of us determining outcomes and principles, we first want to go to the table with we want to retain democracy in its current form, but we're up for changing the way services are delivered. Surely your outcomes drive that. So the idea that one of your key outcomes, if you go back to the slide, Dan, is about retaining local voice and identity, then when you're at the table, it's the, well, how would we do that?
I'd also add, Sam, there that years ago when we first started doing financial modelling around merging of councils, we took quite a principled approach, and we said, well, to tell the truth, the new organisation will set service levels. The new organisation will set a rating structure. We don't know what that's going to look like, so we can't project it. We've since realised you've got to do something, but there is something in that. You can make a decision or see what's there at the moment, but the newly elected council that you become part of will have a governing table who will decide in future how long it takes to align service levels or what the future rating structure will look like. You can't control that. But I guess how well aligned things are now would help give you some signal about what might come in the future.
Sam, do you more mean that idea of giving some visibility to, well, it could look like this at a governance level, and then at an operational level it could look like this in terms of this is what a unitary function could deliver versus this is what a CCO model might look like?
Yes, but it's all like it is, and then the second part of that is like I kind of just want to know what from the partners, like, what are you open to? Because like if they're not actually that interested in full amalgamation where there is one entity that just becomes one governance body and one level of service, then why waste our time like having the conversations? We're better to actually just not to spend any time, money on this, save the money that we're going to save for our ratepayers, and then just get done to us. What? Because if that's the end consequence in 10 years, that's going to be a certain state. Like, why are we trying to engineer something now? Like, so it's. I feel like it's just like a conversation that says, "Hey, Council X, like, where do you sit on the continuum? What do we mean by amalgamation, and where do you sit on the continuum? Like, in terms of how far would you be willing to go?"
Yeah, and I think we know some of that already, but and while there'll be different constructs as to how that council, how amalgamation shapes up at a detailed level, just a reminder that the intent behind the Head Start policy is fewer councils. So eligibility in the Head Start process is not an assumption that two councils hold hands and say we're going to deliver shared services in a really great way that we've not for the last 30 years, and here's a CCO of all our backstop, all our back office functions. That it just doesn't pass the eligibility test. So I think, yeah, we can get the feel of partners, but I think we've also got to test that against what the government is saying, what they want.
Okay, we're going to move forward again, which is about trying to make sure the LTP part of this process, that's section workstream 5. And while it might seem hard to talk about an LTP when we're talking about Head Start in 2028, there's 3 parts that your LTP process could play, I think. One of which is this all goes away, and you don't have to see me again for a while, and the world has changed, and there's no such thing as Head Start, in which case you've got an LTP to deliver with everything in it. Another is that ultimately you decide not to do something and you fall into a backstart process, and you have protected your community outcomes, your desires, what the community needs. You've documented all the things that are important, where the investment needs to go into your community, and however and whoever that gets picked up by already has that all ready for you. And similarly, if you go into the Head Start, you've already got there what's important to your community, what the investment needs to be, why and where, what the services need to be. You've got your community's endorsement of that, because any new organisation is going to start with what's already there. That's the quickest and easiest ways they start in 2028. So they will be relying on what you put into this LTP. So it is not a wasted conversation. As difficult as it is to do, and as difficult as it is to do for your community, when you're also asking them about that. Did you want to jump on this one?
Correct, thank you. And so as we try to make sense of what fits where, that's where this diagram that you've got, the orange one, comes into play. And so basically what this is, that we're up in the box right at the start, looking at who might there be conversations with, roles, and all of the elements that you've just been talking about. We've got the Head Start and Backstop, and you'll see they head off either side. Within that is the LTP, so it happens regardless. And so in here, what we're looking at is proposing a starting position that what we know for certain, and as we talked about last week, something that prepares us for the removal of Three Waters and Central District's waters starting operation from the 1st of July next year. Perhaps continues with a status quo financial strategy, but to reflect the removal of waters, revisits the infrastructure strategy, prepares council for amalgamation, our financial position, services, and addresses key issues that council needs to resolve regardless of reform. So throughout workshops over the last month, years, council started talking about some of those, and the LTP in these early discussions has been the place that you're going to pick these up again. So we'll look at that more next week, but what we're looking at is continuing a long-term plan approach that takes us as council where we need to go regardless of Head Start and Backstop. To the left of the LTP box, you've got that engagement piece that Lisa will elaborate on, but that double duty that informs Head Start, what's important to you, but also does help inform the community outcomes. And so the rest of this diagram takes you through what could happen through a Head Start, that there may be regulatory relief. What we've found out is that any detail of that would be decided after a Head Start proposal has been accepted by Cabinet, so that we don't know that until then. And then it follows through, taking into account the key dates, so who's in government and what does this mean for any proposal. Ultimately, council gets to the end where you've adopted a document enabling the setting of rates to position the district to address key issues and sets up for amalgamation, whether that be after the 2028 election or further out. So to step through the next piece, we'd look at connecting to the community outcomes, and picking up on Councillor Mason's point about connecting the two pieces with community outcomes. Where we are at the moment is that we've got the LTP community outcomes from 2024. How do they move from there and start to incorporate council's priorities, what's important for a Head Start process, and also to incorporate the signal changes to community outcomes through the local government system improvements legislation. So on your the other piece of paper that you've got, one side looks at the current community outcomes. So they were formed and are based
On the Local Government Act definition of community outcomes, to help their shaping, that included the 4 well-beings. So promoting social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of the district or region in the present and in the future. Legislation that's awaiting progression through council will remove the 4 well-beings and would alter the focus of the community outcomes. And so as on the second half of this slide here, council would still need to look at the present and future, or the current and future needs of communities, looking at good quality, cost-effective and local infrastructure, public services and the performance of regulatory functions. As kind of a quick and dirty, what would that look like for the current community outcomes? This would need lots of discussion, but the point is they could all be cut and paste into those headings loosely. But what would be important for you to decide is what carries over from the community outcomes that you've got, what needs to be incorporated to address the current situation, current environment that council's in, those principles that you're looking at for Head Start and council's priorities. So how do we move from where we are now to incorporate all of these pieces to develop some community outcomes? And for that thinking piece, I'll pass you back to Dan.
Excellent.
And sorry, can I just add to that? I think that's one of my sticking points is the removal of the well-beings. What does that actually mean in practice? Because it's a signal from the government that they're removed, but then later on down the track, no, but there are some that are still there, but then you don't, but then you do, but then you don't. So I think that's a conversation that I'm not sure about. What does that actually mean? Removing the community well-beings, but then you have those, statements that kind of give you the opposite understanding.
I'm not sure how many times I've seen them taken in and put out, and I'm sure those with more experience around the council table have probably seen it more times. In practical effect, it doesn't actually mean a lot, but it's all part of the government signal. If you think about systems improvement bill and the change of definition that's there, it's infrastructure. You think about the creation of something called core services. And then by definition, everything else is non-core. So it's, stick to your knitting, rates, rubbish and roads, that sort of stuff. Councils still have enormous scope within the Local Government Act to do the things that their community want. So is there practical effect? No, but there's a signal from government and it fits in with the rates capping, it fits in with Head Start, fits in with simplifying local government. It's all the direction of travel.
It's not until we see the rates capping legislation that we're really going to understand it, because it's at the moment there is nothing in the bill that says because it's not in the purpose statement you can't do it. But in a rates capping environment, as Dan points out, the amount of times wellbeing's been put in and out, it's had very little impact on the actual role of local government. I think the difference is what role does rates capping play in driving councils to a position of we actually need to play a very different role in this space because we no longer have the fiscal ability to deliver it.
So in the spirit of everything moving pretty fast on you at the moment, we're going to do what might normally take you quite a few workshops and quite a bit of time. And we're going to see if we can land on 80% comfort on some community outcomes that can go out as part of the engagement with the community. So we've got a selection of little things to start you thinking there. You've got your priorities. You can have those out there. Going for growth, future fit, financial discipline. You've got the things that you said were important. We've got those statutory references. We've also got your existing community outcomes. And I'm going to start off the conversation by being a bit controversial and saying that of all the things you've said in the last few weeks and months, I've been around the table, I don't think anybody's brought up the environment as one of the key things that this council is focused on.
Yeah, there is a reason for that,
response
so I
to
keep
that?
getting shouted down.
Yeah, well, it hasn't been discussed around the council table, but that doesn't mean that for some of us it's not one of our main priorities. In my case, it's absolutely a main priority, and I think this is a great opportunity to look through all the different lenses that we have in our the requirements, that is environment, that is intergenerational wealth, that is community outcomes, all of that. So even though we haven't talked about it, from my perspective, absolutely important.
Personally, I weave it through, so that's where I always come from that stance that there is only one planet, and it should weave through everything. But unfortunately, in the coming rate scabbing environment, we do have to be a bit more pragmatic. But we definitely shouldn't be forgetting about it. But it doesn't necessarily need to be, to me, a title in its own right. But it certainly needs to be woven through.
Dan, you're contradicting yourself because you've already said there's too many there. So adding another one is just adding more, conflating all the issues. As Nola says, it works through the whole thing.
I'm not talking about adding it to the Head Start pathway criteria. I'm talking about your community outcomes where you've already got it.
So at the moment, outstanding environment is one of your 5 community outcomes, and right in this process we're testing, are these community outcomes still the community outcomes that will endure through your long-term plan? And Dan was starting with a statement to get the conversation going around, well, if it is, how come it's not been a feature of the conversation in the last few weeks? So therefore, is it still one?
Can I just, sorry, maybe I missed this, but why are we doing this now? Like, why? Because this was going to be one of the key parts of the LTP, like reset, refocus, and I thought we were going to kind of have the opportunity to really think about these. And I understand the need to move pace, but like, can you just be really clear about why we're doing this now? Like, kind of why the pressure to go foot on the gas with it?
I think I'll have a go, and Dan might want to. So we're into LTP. This is long-term plan now. So when we talk about future fit roadmap, we're actually talking long-term plan, and your community outcome, your long-term plan should anchor off your community outcomes. So before we get into any more work, and particularly to shape some of the direction you're going to give next week around where we put our energy in the LTP, the setting of community outcomes is you're setting the strategic architecture for your LTP. I acknowledge it will be feeling really, really rushed, and we're not, like, it's not a you've got to deal with this today, but I do need the table to just reflect on the pace in which you're going to need to provide direction for this LTP is like the pace of the Head Start process, because of the uncertainty around Head Start, backstop, reform, who knows what. But this is also us sense checking, testing. 20 minutes ago we tested you on principles for decision making. Principles for decision making should be influenced by community outcomes, and so we're trying to just, it's like, well, did you really mean that? Is that really what matters for Horowhenua? Because the community outcomes should reflect that in your long-term plan too.
Yeah, we're trying to make sure they don't become disconnected, and that you don't end up with a set of community outcomes you're consulting the community on that are different from the things you are looking at and talking about when you're trying to decide Head Start or not.
I think it's also really important to remember the message that you gave us last week around community engagement and community conversation, and this is a way that we can do some work on this week, come back and test it again next week, and then actually weave that into that early community conversation which we'll have around Head Start and long-term plan.
noting that there's still the place for the formal consultation for the long-term plan early in the new year.
Sorry, it's me again. Just in terms of livability, we've been talking about the environment is a huge thing in that, even though we may not have expressed it around the table. The conversations that we're still having in terms of other plans and processes, the environment is absolutely a very important part of that, whether we're talking about Thompson House or we're talking about recreational activities or sporting activities or the domain. That is part of that environmental lens. So from my perspective, I think it's an integral part, and even though we haven't actually identified, well, that's an environmental thing, actually it is.
So, look, I'm going to be very brave. I'm going to say that we delete the outstanding environment, and that under strong communities, the second bullet point, we recognise the value of our district's heritage and its natural environment, which combine to the community's sense of identity and pride. Now, that is clearly diluting it. It doesn't have the richness that sits currently under the community outcome, but I think it kind of reflects the last discussion when we talked about doing what we can do as a council environmentally within our limitations. So those things which directly impact, which we can deliver under the local government umbrella, and advocate for those things which are, more central government and so on. So that really does reshape things, but it puts the environment there alongside heritage, which actually, when you look at that second bullet point under strong communities, district's heritage is only one small part of a small community, and I don't know why environment doesn't sit there anyway. So there you go. So it's conversation started.
So I'm
being brave, and now take me to court.
Foxton will carry on with that. If we actually look at all the bullet points under environment, most of them can be moved to under other. They can move. They literally will take minimise waste. That's an economic decision as well as an infrastructure. Managing pressures on resources, sustainability is economy and infrastructure. So everything under outstanding environment can actually move to another pillar.
Kia ora, just for clarification, is that all we're doing is moving them from, say, partnership with tangata whenua? We can move that to strong communities. Is that all we're doing, is moving it so we can get rid of a heading and put it under something else? Because it looks like we could do that with all of this.
No,
I don't know if that was the intent at the time we did
that's
it.
not necessarily the intent. Yeah. Providing this has been a sort of a way to perhaps shape the discussion. But if I look at this, I would say one of the things you've said, I don't know how many times, is growth. And maybe growth should be one of your headings. But no, if the headings need to change, new ones, that's fine.
Yep. I just wanted to point, just to make it a point, that a lot of the things under the outstanding environment actually aren't huge cost outreaches. So in terms of saying, do we get rid of them because it's going to cost us a lot more in the future, we're already discussing that waste minimisation, but the other points really are just a part of the landscape that we live in now, and that we just continue to ensure that they are and protect them.
Kia ora. I'll just give a statement from a te ao Māori view. Ko au, te tai ao, ko te tai ao ko au. I am the environment and the environment is me. So from the Māori world view, that goes across the board. I tautoko what Nina's saying in terms of, well, I'm saying it as, it seems like if you're going to shift it somewhere else, that it's you're minimising or minimalising that, you're minimalising the importance of the environmental across every area for the taio, because that's what, as Māori, that's our that's the ngako, that's the source of who we are. So kia ora.
I'm just wondering, wouldn't we just go off what our priorities are now, or is that not long? Is that for the triennium or not long-term plan? Wouldn't we just best of us tease those out and go with that?
I think if I look at those are your organisational priorities. and so you're trying to reflect them into some community messages. But they, yep.
And just one last thing, Māori are partners, not stakeholders. Kia ora. Just to be clear.
That's a conscious decision council's made, though. That's not the legal position, right? So that's a values-based decision that council has made. It's not just a fait accompli.
I disagree to that because many things circles have been in, and iwi circles, and this is what we stand for as Māori. So it does, at every level, that's what it is. We are partners, treaty partner, not a stakeholder.
Councillor Kesha, can I just check with you, because when you made that statement, is it because you were worried about something on this paper? Noting that it talks about building mutually respectful partnerships with tangata whenua.
Yes, I want to make sure that we don't miss out the importance of having that partnership valued and respected under Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
And do you think that that is articulated in the partnership with tangata whenua community outcome?
I think there's a good, I think I'm reiterating, I guess. Yeah, I'm not going against it, but reiterating to make sure that this is our stance as iwi Māori e tangata whenua. Kia ora.
And I guess adding on to that, just in terms of our requirements, if we are going to make big changes or decide that we're not going to focus on something that affects Māori, that's something that we need to think about. So if we're going to talk about the environment and getting rid of this and that, and it actually affects our partners, we can't really make a decision around the table exclusively on that. We have to ensure that we have those discussions as well.
It would be really good to hear from those members we've not heard from, just because we're kind of needing to get a bit of a steer on how we progress this work. And if you're feeling uncomfortable about the pace or the process, then we'd rather hear that as well, because we are having to work at pace. So the more direct you can be with your feedback, the better we can respond to that.
So, just looking at the document that's in front of us, am I correct in the fact that literally the community outcomes for the current long-term plan have just been flipped into the other four?
Yeah, I don't get how.
And that was merely an example of how something could be done, but it wasn't meant to indicate that that was a proposal. It was just to signal that central government is changing the legislation. I may have taken it a step too far, but that is what has been done. Yeah.
It was trying to take the new definition as described in the Systems Improvement Bill and get you to reflect on what we currently say is important and whether it aligns or doesn't.
Should we do some of this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, which of the community outcomes would we link to going for growth? So, would we would the bullet points come up straight under that as a heading, do you think, rather than how it's broken across? I wasn't necessarily saying that.
So
at the moment, you've got 3 organisational priorities. You're currently running with 5 community outcomes. So I'm trying to test those existing community outcomes against these as a way of seeing, are those community outcomes still the right thing? And they might be exactly the right thing to keep going with. I'm just trying to test that by saying some things.
I'm just wary of creating expectations in a long-term plan where we're not going to be able to have much flexibility in terms of what we're going to do. And I worry that when people are submitting to us, they're going to say, well, this is your community outcome, why aren't you agreeing with me? And we're saying, sorry, we just can't afford that with rates capping and amalgamation and everything else that's in front of us. So I'm just wary about creating lots of outcomes that we might want to deliver, which is perfectly great, but the realistic reality that we are, the landscape that we're operating in, means that some of them may not eventuate.
So for going for growth, I was looking at fit for purpose infrastructure could go in there because that's going to help us build our growth. Is that where we're going?
That's great, Nina.
So my concern is, based on, and certainly Curry, you didn't go too far, if the government's expecting to see how it links into their infrastructure, public service and performance and regulatory, are we doing a disservice going that way, or are we better to go that way and say to the government, this is how our goals fit with your 3?
So the government is not saying your community outcomes need to align with our new definition of the bill. We're just giving that as a reflection point as you go through this process. I'd really encourage the council table to lift up and think about when you stand in front of your community and say, these are the outcomes we're fighting for as Horowhenua District Council. These are our anchors. These are our po.
Can I just be upfront? I feel like I'm quite unprepared for this session, and so I think that I don't know how others are feeling, but I kind of there needs to be some reflection and thinking, like at a personal level, and so I don't know whether it's just and you guys can. It's totally reasonable to expect us to provide, thoughtful feedback, but I'm just being really honest. I feel really unprepared, and I don't feel like I'm going to give you the best of my thinking. Like and so, I can see what you want to achieve now, and so I wonder if the best step would be to pause, send us away with some homework to actually go. If you had to have 5 headings to frame community outcomes, what would they be? And then we come back and find where there's some matching or some alignment, and then we focus on the ones where there is an alignment. And I don't know how that sits with your time frame, but I just know from my perspective that I don't think I can give you what you want today, and so I don't want to waste your time.
I'll actually go one step further and actually agree with you, Sam, in terms of it actually is a lot, and I would like to have not just us going away on our own, but I'd like to actually have a good conversation with everyone in terms of what is important to you and what isn't when we're looking at this. Well, no, it's more together we're at a time frame here, and we don't have that ability to actually sit down with each other as we should, and council are only time to go, let's just chat and bring that together.
It's got to be public, but it has democratically accountable. Yeah.
So I'm going to throw a I don't know, firecracker in that I like the community outcomes that we already have. I actually think they all fit within our three goals. So I don't know a way forward because I look at this and the work that went into this, and I sat and listened to a lot of it when it happened, and I would be hard pressed to make it better personally. But I agree what also Mayor Bernie said is that some of this we may not be able to deliver on.
I think that look, thank you for that feedback and that direct feedback, Councillor Jennings and Councillor Mitchell-Cotard. And you might recall Dan at the start of this workshop kind of talking about this is going to feel messy. It's not this like linear line, and I think I would have used the word forgiveness, so he used the word indulgence. I think like this is where we all have to manage our expectations of each other about what can be achieved ahead of a workshop / at a workshop, because we are now working on a week-to-week cycle where every day we are trying to meet a milestone internally. So I hear that we need some more time, and Dan did say, Dan will be thinking right now, I told you so, Monique, because he was like, I think we are pushing it, Monique, to get this conversation today. But what I need the governance table to really reflect on is this is what it's going to feel like for the next 12 months, because we are building a long-term plan in a context like no other. And yes, we're going to need to think about how we can better prepare elected members for the workshop the following week. But we don't have weeks to allow lots of conversations for lots of this stuff to be unpacked. And every long-term plan conversation, unless we have reason for it to be public excluded, must be a public workshop in this sort of forum and environment. But I think in the context of the feedback around community outcomes, what I'm wondering, just to suggest a way forward, is you take some time to kind of reflect on the many things that you know are important to you personally and who and how you represent this community. Reflect on the current community outcomes, the 6 principles for the Head Start process, the 3 priorities, how it might align with the new legislation. And if we could, I know that some of you will provide feedback in different ways. Some of you will be happy to sit in a computer and redraft it, and we would welcome that. Some of you might just go away and jot a few ideas down in an email. If we could have that by Monday lunchtime, then what we can commit to, depending on the scale of feedback, is at next Wednesday's workshop coming back with here's where there's alignment, and here's where it's like easy to find the way through, and here's where you need to have that conversation that you suggest, Councillor Mitchell-Cotard, where you need to shake this out a bit. And I don't expect that next Wednesday you are saying, yep, we're adopting those community outcomes, bring it to the May Council meeting, Monique. We know there'll be some further iteration, but it needs to be in a, like, ideally, and like, we're trying to frame this community engagement around the Head Start process, which you've told us is important, in a way where we're achieving a double duty outcome, where we're also getting some feedback from community about community outcomes. And if you think that there's a different approach we should take to that, then we'd welcome that feedback also. We've just taken a principle of no regrets. We don't know where this whole reform pitch is going, and so wherever possible, when we spend money and time on something, we're thinking about how it can add value to the long-term plan, not just reform. Does that feel fair?
I just want to clarify, it's not about me not being democratic and not about being open with the community. It's about engaging in discussion, especially with councillors who may feel a little bit more comfortable discussing things one-on-one or 2 or 3 on together, and then being able to come back with a much clearer understanding. So I still stand if anyone would like to sit and discuss this before we have to hand it in. If there's any questions, then I'm happy to discuss.
Monique, is that part of the problem though, that we're talking the Head Start values and then in the same discussion, we're talking community outcomes for a long-term plan, and trying to sort of mesh them in together almost, and that is so, my mistake in terms of saying the environment's not one of your things, yet it should be in the community outcomes. But and I just wonder whether there's a bit of confusion for elected members trying to understand the difference between the two conversations and how they do. And I see how they link, it's really important, but just in terms of those sorts of outcomes and values that we're talking about, those two different pieces of work, I think it may be offering, just confusing for us a little bit.
Yeah, I want to add to that because I'm sorry I'm confused. Because I thought we're discussing community outcomes, and as I've said, is there a need to reduce what we've currently got?
We don't have so as officers, we don't have a view on that.
Yeah, because he's not an officer.
Yeah, but Dan's not to have a view on community outcomes.
So I come back and say
you own community outcomes.
It's fine. So I'm not asking the officer to challenge. I'm going back to while I accept you're challenging us, we can have the option of saying, actually, no, we like status quo.
Yeah, so
These are your community outcomes. Absolutely, they can
Exactly.
be whatever they can be.
So, David, you went out and kind of let out earlier. I have never heard any of us sit around this table and say we don't think our community outcomes are fit for purpose. And I heard Nola say the huge amount of work that went into these community outcomes. Are there some things we could do to tweak them? Maybe. Are there things we think should be in there? Maybe. But we've never had that conversation, never come up through all of the induction process or anything that these community outcomes are not fit for purpose. And I've never had anybody from the community challenge me on that or say your community outcomes say this, but you don't live them. So is this a piece of work that we just simply don't need to do, that we can, we can work with, and maybe by Monday, as you say, if we feel there's something that needs to be added or changed, or we do that. But
Joe, that's a good test. But do people think this is a refinement process, or do some people look at the community outcomes and say it's broken?
So we have had one contribution for what some community outcomes could be. So I've seen a few of you writing down. So if you are comfortable, put it up. That's great, because then that can go out to help other people's thinking in the next 3 days before you have to hand it in.
Can I just jump in? Because, in terms of this, there's nothing that mentions that rates need to be affordable so people can afford them. We're not in the business of bankrupting people. So that, we haven't talked, finance is probably the most critical component of this. So the other thing that I'm looking at too is I would have thought as part of the long-term process we'd be looking at things like, are we going to go down a more user pays thing, or are we going to socialise more of the cost, or how does that all, that's the conversation I thought we'd be having, not sort of makes people feel good.
Echo the comments of Councillor Gray, because that's exactly it. The long-term plan process for me was going to allow us to re-look at these community outcomes and really test them and what they actually mean and realise in practice. And so, for me, there's refinement certainly, and some of it there's some good bones in there, but some of the other, there is definitely some challenging conversations like the ones that Morgan just frames, because there absolutely is some big gaps in there, and so it's in between that refinement and chuck them out. It's a rework them and refine where possible. That's my perspective.
So we all comfortable with the approach that you've got homework, which is to provide feedback on whether it's refinement or reworking, that feedback is by lunchtime Monday, in order to give us some time to shift to present something back based on the many voices, to try and get some form of balance on a way forward around the community outcomes.
Yeah, I think so. Can I just have clarification that the slides today will be in our portals tonight? Or they already are there? Okay, right. Thank you.
Do you think it would be helpful? Does everyone understand the importance of community outcomes in building the long-term plan? Or is there something further we could do to help your understanding about what role community outcomes play compared to that of like a financial strategy or a revenue and financing policy versus an activity statement? We might think about how we touch on that next week, Kara.
Yes.
It would be useful, I think, for the table to provide just one example of how a community outcome influences or drives something practical, because I think then people can go, oh yeah, I see how the organisation takes the words on this piece of paper, uses it to influence something that happens, and then the output that pops out the other end.
Just wanting, I guess for me, I'm actually not.
That real life example now, because I saw this play out in the last long-term plan. We support whānau marae, hapu and iwi in achieving their aspirations. In the last long-term plan, Council established an Urupu Fund to support the funding at marae, which had not been done before, but it was something that had been long advocated for. So that's a really practical example of it was a community outcome, and then actually the councillor of the day used that community outcome to advocate for that funding in the long-term plan.
Just on these outcomes, so look, this is 2024. When we, I suppose, you look at the current, maybe financial and also political, like if I was doing these again now, 2 years on, it would change them dramatically as far as priorities go. And I think this probably does enable us just to be future fit, if you like, as far as prioritising and narrowing the expectations down, because some of these are a little bit fluffy, but we're not necessarily going to enable or align with them all.
Conscious of time, and we've got an important workshop that we need to get through before NZTA. So I'll just hand over to Lisa because we want to test with you community engagement. Community conversation.
Yes. So our original date for starting our community conversation was Monday. And the way that we're proposing to do that is a three-pronged approach: an education campaign, because people won't necessarily know about the central government's announcement or what it means for them or council, being upfront with things like what we don't know and what we do know, the time frame that we've got to deliver a plan by or not. And then the next phase is a community conversation, which would largely be a short online survey. We've got about 10,000 emailable ratepayers that we can send that out via socials as well. And then kānohi, ki te kānohi workshops with interest groups, iwi, hapu, those sorts of things. And then I'd like to test with you all the content in those. So questions that we'd be looking to ask in the education, answer in the education campaign is things like, what is central government proposing? What will it mean for us? What are the unknowns? What's the difference between Head Start and Backstop? With the fact that we don't have much time to make decisions, it's going to be a bit messy, as you alluded to, Councillor. For the community conversation, keen to test whether we've landed that or whether you would ask additional things, because I'll go away from this and we will start building this. So what matters most in your community? What services do you value most from council? Where should we invest more or less? How open are you to changes that improve long-term sustainability? What would you need to see to feel confident about change?
where should we be putting our energy for the long-term plan? And we're thinking about changes to X, whatever that might be, for the long-term plan. What do you think?
And maybe to get the feedback flowing, would you expect to see a more direct question about, do you support Horowhenua District Council amalgamating with another council? Thought that would be the feedback.
I think that oh yeah, preference, yeah.
Yeah, if we're going north, this is all.
You've got to offer.
You've got good questions on this piece of paper, which is, do you support amalgamation? Who with? What is important for council to fight for? That's what I thought you were.
Sorry, this is probably really difficult, because it's the one thing that I have challenges when I speak to the community, is that there's this misalignment with this idea that council is like a private company as opposed to a values-based organisation. So when we're looking at the community conversations, it's not just about what's affecting the individual, it's about how we look at our community as a whole in the changes that may possibly be made. And I think that's a huge distinction that's not always looked on, and which makes sometimes complexities. For example, talking about library, it's not important for me. I don't go there, yes, but if you look at the long-term consequences, the library helps children who can't necessarily get books. It helps.
Thank you, Katrina. We're
Sorry.
really out of time to keep going on. So I've just allowed Sam to disappear to do parenting, because it is sperm as well as other things, eggs. So just wanted to confirm that he supports direction of travel. He would still like to write to every ratepayer, but accept that not everyone agrees that would be good value for money. That's just his feedback. I believe this has been a very tough but honest conversation, so I thank everybody at the top table for what you're trying to do at pace, and everybody has homework.
It's really quick.
2 seconds, one, and
just for those of us who are chairing groups, like for example community wellbeing, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, could there be some inclusion for those groups and committees of council that there's an info pack or something that we can speak to, because those are really important feedback loops for us.
What I heard was some simple questions around, do you support North, South or the status quo? Are you happy as a table to ask the community that without providing them any substantial information about why they might be supporting those options? Or do you think that needs to come later?
They don't have a choice because we don't have that information.
Can I just ask one more thing? Tagline options, has anyone got a preference? Has anyone got a preference for the tagline for the engagement? Let's get ahead of change. Our future is changing, have your say. Help shape our future direction. Let's own our future, Horowhenua. Let's get a head start on change, Horowhenua.
Go with number 4. Let's own our future, Horowhenua.
I'll go with number 2.
I'm a number 2, not literally.
Does anyone else want to have their say before we go?
I'll do 5.
Okay, we'll make that decision internally, but good to see there were no allergic reactions on any of the 5. Thank you, Councillor Fox. We'll leave it there and we'll see you next week for yeah.
You're not staying, Monique.